The central flaw in my previous analysis of this case was not a deception. It was not a missing document or a concealed financial account. It was a matter of physical stature. The figure on Nancy Guthrie's porch, the man recorded by the doorbell camera in the dead of night, was profiled by the Federal Bureau of Investigation as standing between 5'9" and 5'10". He had an average build, a man who was neither remarkably tall nor unusually short. Tomaso Cioni is taller than that description allows, and if the man at the door is not Tomaso, then the entire premise of my last video collapses. I have examined every single comment from viewers. Within that feedback, I believe I have located the missing link, and its implications are staggering. But before we reveal that name, we must journey back to the evening when everything was irrevocably altered. The date was January 31st. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She had called the same Tucson residence her home since 1985. That home was characterized by native desert plants in the front yard. A protective security gate stood before the main entrance, and her neighbors were people who had resided there for decades. Between approximately 9:30 and 9:50 that night, her son-in-law, Tomaso, escorted her to the house. He states that he witnessed her go safely inside. According to his account, she was secure. 4 hours later, an unknown individual approached her front door under the cover of darkness. The doorbell camera captured his image. He wore a mask to hide his face. He had on gloves. The man carried a black Ozark Trail backpack. He also had what appeared to be a belly band-style holster secured around his waist. He lifted his hand toward the camera. He made contact with the lens. Then, he gained entry to the home. Nancy Guthrie has not been seen or heard from since that moment. There has been no body, no demand for ransom, and no verified sighting, only an oppressive silence. And it is this very silence that gives the case such a heavy, haunting presence. When an individual vanishes under these circumstances, only two scenarios are plausible. The act was either completely random, or it was deliberately orchestrated. Sheriff Nanos voiced his conviction that Nancy was specifically chosen. This was not a chance encounter. She was targeted. When a crime is targeted, it means someone made a conscious choice to select her. Someone must have been familiar with her. Someone must have understood her daily patterns. Someone had to possess the knowledge of when she would be vulnerable and alone. This realization brings us back to the fundamental problem. If Tomaso's height makes him an unlikely match for the man on the porch, then perhaps he was not the perpetrator at the scene. It is possible he did not need to be. Perhaps there were two individuals involved, an architect of the crime and the operative who carried it out. Allow me to illustrate this concept in simple terms. Consider a person who wishes to construct a house. One individual is responsible for drafting the blueprints. This person is the architect. A different person is the one who physically swings the hammer. This is the builder. Both are essential to the creation of the house. However, only one of them is ever witnessed holding the tools of the trade. In my last examination of this case, it was suggested that Tomaso might have been the architect, the person with intimate knowledge of the home, the surveillance cameras, and Nancy's schedule. But if he was not the one to swing the hammer on that fateful night, then another person must have. Someone of the correct height. Someone with the skills to enter a residence in total darkness. This would have to be someone who was not intimidated by the prospect of confronting an elderly woman. It would have to be someone who had perhaps done this type of thing before. It is at this juncture that the missing piece of the puzzle emerges. His name is Dominic Aaron Lee Evans. Now, before you conclude that I am making an accusation, it is vital to listen with great care. No official law enforcement body has ever publicly identified Dominic Evans as a person of interest. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has not taken him into custody. The Sheriff's Department has not filed any charges against him. Every statement I am about to make is founded on public records and information that is accessible to any citizen. This is not a verdict. This is an investigation into a single question. Who is Dominic Evans? To begin to understand, we must rewind the clock nearly 20 years, back to the year 2007 in Tucson, Arizona. 3 men, strangers to one another at the time, responded to advertisements on Craigslist seeking musicians. One was a drummer, another a guitarist, and the third played bass and sang. The band they formed was called Early Black. Dominic was the drummer. Tomaso was the bassist and lead vocalist. They rehearsed together for countless hours. They made recordings of their music. They performed at small venues in Tucson, Phoenix, and Flagstaff. They never achieved mainstream success, but they did develop a close bond over the course of 19 years. 19 years is not a period of casual friendship. That duration represents shared birthdays, holidays, long road trips to performances, and late-night conversations after practice sessions. It means being privy to someone's personal struggles, understanding their financial difficulties, and knowing the dynamics of their family. Throughout every one of those 19 years, Tomaso was married to the daughter of Nancy Guthrie. This connection implies that Dominic would have been aware of the family. He would have likely heard stories about Savannah. He almost certainly would have heard about Nancy, not because he was engaged in espionage, but because that is the nature of friendship. Friends discuss their lives, and in a criminal case that may hinge on betrayed trust, such deep-rooted friendships are of paramount importance. Let us now turn our attention to a more sobering matter. Dominic Evans has a documented criminal history in Pima County, Arizona. Official public records detail felony charges that include burglary, robbery, theft, embezzlement, and driving under the influence. I will state again that this information is part of the public record, and I want you to truly contemplate what these terms signify in practical, real-world terms. Burglary is the act of entering a property where you have no right to be, with the advance intention of committing a crime. This is not petty theft. It means illegally entering a building, a private residence. Robbery is a separate and more serious offense than simple theft. Robbery is the taking of property by means of violence or the threat of violence. It involves a direct confrontation with a victim, standing before them, and using force to overpower them. It requires a particular kind of psychology to commit such an act. For most of us, there is a fundamental boundary that is never breached. To enter a home in the dead of night, to confront its occupant, and to take them away requires a complete disregard for that boundary. The video from the doorbell camera reveals a figure utterly devoid of panic. Every movement was calm, deliberate, almost serene. His approach was methodical, and his interaction with the camera suggested a deep familiarity with surveillance technology. He was also wearing gloves. This was not the stumbling confusion of a random intoxicated person. This was the work of someone who had a clear and calculated plan. Does a criminal record predetermine a person's future actions? Of course not. Individuals can change, and lives can be rebuilt. That much is undeniable. However, when constructing a profile based on specific capabilities, a person's history becomes critical. So, the question arises. Within Tomaso's circle, who possessed the knowledge to gain entry into a home without a sound? Who would have the composure to confront another human being in the pitch black of night and not falter? Who would know precisely how to navigate a space without alerting anyone to their presence? For answers, one must look to experience, and the act of burglary is a harsh teacher. The act of robbery also imparts its own set of skills. These are not lessons that one simply forgets over time. They become embedded in your muscle memory, much like a percussionist never loses their sense of rhythm. And then there was the matter of his height. The Federal Bureau of Investigation estimated it between 5'9" and 5'10". Dominic Evans's physical description aligns with that range. He had an average build and facial hair. Some internet sleuths even pointed out what appeared to be a tattoo on his wrist in archival footage of his band. Yet, it would be irresponsible to claim a tattoo is definitive proof of anything. Grainy, low-resolution video is notoriously deceptive. The way light plays can create illusions. The camera's angle can distort reality. A mask can obscure crucial features. For these reasons, investigators must look beyond a face and search for patterns of behavior. They examine personal connections. They analyze geographic proximity. Dominic had been a resident of the greater Tucson area for a number of years. Nancy's residence was in the Catalina foothills. Tomaso and Annie resided approximately 4 miles away from her. When these locations are plotted on a map, they create a compact triangle in the northern part of Tucson. The proximity is striking and suggests a certain convenience. For an individual planning an operation that demanded intimate knowledge of the local area, the ability to traverse its roads under the cover of darkness, and the need for a swift exit, residing within that triangle would be a significant advantage. But geography is not the most compelling element of this narrative. The most critical evidence emerged from what investigators discovered in the aftermath of Nancy's disappearance. They found 2 distinct DNA profiles, both belonging to unidentified males. The first DNA sample was extracted from a glove discovered roughly 2 miles from the home. Visually, the glove seemed to be a match for the one worn by the suspect on the porch. The genetic material on that glove did not belong to Nancy, nor did it match any of her family members. Furthermore, it yielded no matches within the Federal Bureau of Investigation's comprehensive national database. A second, different DNA profile was recovered from biological material found inside the residence, and then the sheriff's department confirmed a pivotal fact. The DNA from within the house was not the same as the DNA found on the glove. 2 profiles meant 2 separate people. This implied that a minimum of 2 individuals had left their genetic markers in connection with this crime. Not a single perpetrator, but 2. It is a moment that forces a pause. If 2 people were involved, then the discrepancy in height is no longer an obstacle to the theory. One of them could have been taller, the other shorter. One could have been the mastermind, while the other carried out the physical act. It suggests a partnership, the architect and the operative, But what would be the logistics for two people to orchestrate this? One has to consider Nancy's condition. She was 84 years old. She relied on a pacemaker and had restricted mobility. She was not someone who could be hurried down a long driveway. She could not be forced into a vehicle with haste without creating significant risk. The entire process would demand time. Time that necessitates a lookout. Time during which someone would have to ensure no neighbor's light flickered on, that no vehicle passed by unexpectedly. They would have to be certain that no dog began barking in a way that would draw unwanted attention. The individual inside the home cannot simultaneously be the one standing guard on the street. Such a scenario implies a level of coordination. And that coordination, in turn, suggests a deep-seated trust between the perpetrators. It is the kind of trust that is typically forged over many years in a long-standing relationship. Let us now turn our attention back to January 23rd, just 8 days prior to Nancy's disappearance. Another peculiar incident was documented. A man was captured on camera walking backward in the vicinity of her house. He appeared entirely out of place in that environment. There is a theory that this was not random, but a rehearsal, a meticulously planned dry run. He could have been testing the angles of surveillance cameras or gauging potential response times. If two individuals were indeed involved, it is conceivable they were both there that evening. Perhaps one was on foot, and perhaps the other was positioned in a nearby vehicle, watching, timing the exercise, counting the seconds. This leads to a crucial point. For the night of the actual crime on February 1st, perpetrators would have prepared meticulously. They could have left their mobile phones at home. They might have used a borrowed car. They could have fabricated a solid alibi. But the night of January 23rd was intended to be invisible. It was an event that no one was ever meant to see. Therefore, if two specific cell phones were in the vicinity of the house on January 23rd, and those exact same two phones were near the house again on February 1st, cellular tower data could potentially expose that incriminating pattern. Mobile phones establish connections with cell towers as a matter of course. They create a digital trail even when they are not being actively used. And law enforcement has the ability to compare those digital footprints across different dates. What would it mean if two devices were shown to have traveled identical paths on both of those nights? The implications would be profound, exceptionally so. Then, we must consider the ransom-like emails that were dispatched to various media organizations. One particular communication employed the peculiar phrase "the main individual," rather than a more common term like the kidnapper. It did not say the man, but specifically the main individual. This choice of words suggests a structure, a hierarchy of roles, as if the author is keenly aware that multiple people were involved. As one analyst noted, the writer seems to be close to the flame, which is to say, intimately connected to the crime itself. I am near enough to understand the specifics, yet too far removed to feel any sense of security. If a small community of people holds the truth, that alliance is destined to fracture, particularly when the incentive has grown to $200,000. Money is a crucible for loyalty. It puts friendships to the ultimate test. It challenges 19-year connections because once genetic profiles are returned and genealogical analysis commences, family histories are assembled from relatives who have used ancestry services. Secrecy becomes a burden too heavy to bear. And this is the point where we must halt, for the next chapter of this narrative explores what occurs when the weight becomes unbearable. It is a story of two men, acquaintances for 19 years, who both retreat into silence. This is when the inquiry enters its most crucial stage, when the forensic clock begins its countdown, and when a single missing element could either fortify the entire case or cause its complete collapse. However, before we proceed any further, there is something else to consider. We must examine a minor, seemingly insignificant detail. It is the front gate at NY's residence. The front gate at NY's house. It might appear to be a trivial point, but often the most overlooked clues are the ones that speak the loudest. In Tucson, it is common for homes to have two entrances. Beyond the primary front door stands a metal security gate which acts as a secondary line of defense. It is a second layer of protection. NY's house was equipped with one. Now, recall the video evidence once more. The figure approaches the entrance. He shows no signs of a struggle. He does not force the door. He does not attempt to pry it open. He uses no visible tools. He simply extends a hand and obscures the camera's view. The figure then seems to advance without obstruction. There is no discernible moment where he has to breach a locked barrier. This presents us with two straightforward scenarios. First, that Nancy simply forgot to secure the gate. She was 84 years old. She had resided in that house for many years. The area was known for being peaceful. It is conceivable she felt secure. It is plausible that she never imagined an intruder would arrive in the dead of night. That is one possibility. But we must also consider a second one. Someone else may have ensured the gate was not locked, Perhaps an individual who had visited earlier in the evening, a person familiar with the property, an individual who understood that the entire operation would be compromised if that gate remained shut. Tomaso accompanied Nancy home at approximately 9:30 or 9:50. He stated that he observed her entering the house. He claimed to have verified her safety, but did he confirm the status of the outer gate before he departed? Did he hear the definitive click of the lock engaging, or was it left unsecured, allowing someone to pass through unimpeded hours later? To be clear, this is not an allegation. It is a necessary question, because the man on the porch moved with the confidence of someone who was not expecting any obstacles. He moved like someone for whom a path had already been made clear, and, if a path was indeed cleared, it strongly implies a degree of coordination. Let us now widen our perspective and examine the entire situation. We have two distinct DNA profiles, suggesting two potential suspects. There was a possible dry run on January 23rd, a specifically chosen target, a calm and methodical entry, a silent abduction, and no identified getaway vehicle. No witnesses reported any sounds of a struggle, and there were no verified sightings afterward. This sequence of events does not suggest a crime of passion or chaos. It suggests control. And exercising that level of control almost always involves forethought, and forethought almost always involves some form of communication. If there were two perpetrators, what was their method of communication? They could have used phones for text messages or calls. But any seasoned criminal understands that mobile devices create a digital trail. Perhaps they communicated face-to-face. Perhaps they utilized encrypted applications. Perhaps they left their phones behind entirely. But there is one piece of data that is not so easily hidden. That data is the location information logged by cell phone towers. Even when a phone is not in active use, it passively communicates with the nearest towers. Every one of these connections generates a digital record. Authorities are able to obtain what is known as a tower dump. This provides them with a comprehensive list of every device that registered with specific towers within a given time frame. By executing a tower dump for the evening of January 23rd and another for the night of February 1st, investigators can cross-reference the data. Should two separate devices appear in the vicinity of NY's home on both of those nights, it establishes a compelling pattern. And in a court of law, patterns carry immense weight, because while a coincidence might happen once, it is far less likely to happen twice. It is especially unlikely to happen in the exact same location, at the exact same time, involving the very same people. Now, consider this scenario. Two phones are located near NY's residence on January 23rd. Those same two phones are detected near her home again on February 1st. Both devices are registered to individuals who are known to each other, individuals who share a 19-year friendship. A revelation like that would not simply invite suspicion, it would likely lead to arrests. And we must remember, the events of January 23rd were meant to go completely unnoticed. If that night was a rehearsal, the individuals involved would have felt no need for caution. They would have likely carried their phones as they always did. They would have likely used their personal vehicles. They would have likely operated under the assumption that their actions were invisible. But the discovery of the backward walker footage suddenly made that night critically important, extremely important. Let us now turn our attention to the concept of silence. In the aftermath of Nancy's disappearance, Tomaso's home was besieged by the media. Reporters maintained a constant vigil. A bank of cameras was trained on his front door. But then, there was a shift. According to reports from News Nation, Tomaso was no longer seen in public. He had vanished from public view. No interviews were granted. No appearances were made. Of course, there could be perfectly innocent reasons. Legal counsel might have advised him to stay away from the media. Perhaps the weight of it all became too much. He could have retreated to a private place, which is understandable. Yet, Dominic Evans has also remained completely quiet. There was no official statement, no press conference, not even a single post on social media. No one heard him say, "I hope they find Nancy." Absolutely nothing. In this digital age, most people would offer some kind of message, however small, even just a simple prayer. Silence is open to interpretation, but when two people who are closely connected both fall silent, it suggests something more. A simultaneous silence feels orchestrated, as if two individuals receive the exact same instruction. Do not speak. Do not go online. Just wait. And perhaps they are both anticipating the same event, the outcome of the DNA analysis. Because as soon as those results are complete, they will be entered into the national database. A match would give investigators an immediate lead. If there is no match, the process of genealogical testing gets underway. This method examines the genetic markers of distant family members, from first cousins to second cousins, people who may have simply used ancestry websites for recreation. From that starting point, investigators meticulously construct family trees, tracing each branch until the lineage converges on a single individual. The process can be long, stretching for weeks or even months. but it is proven effective. It has closed cases that have been cold for decades. This case, however, is new, meaning the records are more pristine. The data is simpler to trace. Now consider the implications of this very carefully. Should one of the DNA profiles belong to an individual with a criminal history in Arizona, it is likely their genetic information is already on file. If that proves to be the case, and a match is found, the wait for answers could be brief, perhaps incredibly brief. But even without a direct hit in the criminal database, the power of genealogy can still significantly narrow the field of possibilities. And if the name identified through this process leads back to someone within that initial dark circle of associates, a person with a 19-year friendship, then the entire framework we have considered transforms from mere speculation. It becomes a solid structure. But there is another dimension to this mystery. The emails, written in the style of a ransom note. A particular message claimed the sender knew the identity of the main individual. That specific phrasing is peculiar. If a single person was responsible, why not simply say the kidnapper? Why invent a title? Titles imply distinct roles. They suggest a hierarchy, like a team project where one person takes the lead and others provide support. One is the main individual, while others are assistants. The author of those emails also stated they were gambling for his safety. It is the language of someone who feels perilously close to the danger, near enough to feel fear, and near enough to possess knowledge. Yet they are not confident enough to come forward directly. If a group of people knows the truth of that night, even a small one, an immense pressure will begin to test their bonds. The reward stands at $200,000. For many, that is a life-altering sum of money. An amount like that can shatter friendships. It can dissolve loyalty, particularly if an individual believes the DNA evidence will inevitably implicate them regardless. And there is another element to contemplate. If two individuals carried out this act, the trust between them would have to be unbreakable. They would need complete faith that neither person will confess, neither will succumb to panic, and neither will make a critical error. But human beings are fallible. They always make mistakes. Sometimes the errors are minor, sometimes they are catastrophic, and even the smallest missteps can leave behind a significant trail. A single glove, discarded 2 miles from the scene, a figure walking backwards, captured on a security camera, a turn of phrase in an email that discloses more than the writer ever meant to. And at this juncture, the narrative constricts, because every piece of information we have examined converges on a single, pivotal question. If there were indeed 2 collaborators, who will be the first to break under the pressure, the mastermind or the accomplice? And what occurs when one of them comes to the realization that their silence may not be their salvation? Initially, silence feels like a fortress. It offers a sense of security. By saying nothing, you cannot create contradictions. By saying nothing, you cannot make a verbal mistake. If you remain silent, you offer no new leads for law enforcement to pursue. But silence has its own weight, and it creates a crushing pressure. That pressure intensifies with every news van parked on the street. It escalates as the DNA analysis progresses. The pressure mounts as the reward money increases. And this kind of duress changes people. It alters the way they see one another. Picture 2 individuals, isolated in separate homes, both consumed by the same news reports, both hearing the phrase genetic genealogy. Both of them hear the mention of 2 distinct DNA profiles, and both know with certainty where they were on the nights of January 23rd and February 1st. Trust is a simple matter when the waters are calm. But trust becomes a fragile thing when helicopters circle above and federal agents begin knocking on doors. With every ring of the telephone, the question arises, is this it? With every car that decelerates near the house, the thought forms, is this the moment? And if one partner begins to suspect the other might falter first, that seed of doubt begins to grow. Now, we must turn to the question of motive. Because without a motive, any theory remains insubstantial. Sheriff Nanos stated that Nancy was specifically targeted. This means that someone selected her for a reason. What compels a person to select an 84-year-old woman as a target? In scenarios like these, a handful of motives typically surface. Financial gain, a desire for dominance, a deep-seated vendetta, or entry to a prized asset. For decades, Nancy's residence had been the same house. Real estate in the Catalina foothills commands a high price. The chain of title is a matter of public record. Then, another piece of the puzzle emerged from the months preceding Nancy's disappearance. A legal instrument, a power of attorney, had been executed 8 months prior. A power of attorney grants an individual legal control over the financial affairs of another person. This single detail, in isolation, is not conclusive evidence of a crime. Numerous families establish such arrangements for their aging parents, a common practice. Yet, when placed within the sequence of events, its context shifts. It stands as a chronological marker 8 months before she vanished, followed by the practice run, the drop-off, and finally, the abduction itself. Law enforcement constructs its cases by creating timelines, sequencing events, and identifying any deviations from the norm. They search for anomalies and repeating behaviors. Often, an element that initially appears benign later reveals its true significance. Let us reconsider the concept of specialized skills. A burglar masters unlawful entry. A robber learns to manage direct conflict. Embezzlement, then, is a study in sustained deceit. And music, strangely, instills a sense of rhythm and physical coordination. A percussionist develops a keen sense of timing. A percussionist learns to maintain a constant beat amidst surrounding chaos. This ability does not equate to criminality, but it does demonstrate a high level of discipline. Now, picture two individuals orchestrating a sophisticated operation. One partner possesses intimate knowledge of the target location. The other is responsible for the physical act. Their communication would have to be meticulous. They would discuss parking locations, approach routes, the presence of surveillance, the time required to cross the property, and the window of opportunity before a neighbor's suspicion is aroused. A decision would be made regarding who would carry the pack. They would determine who wears the weapon, who neutralizes the camera, and who serves as the lookout. These are not choices born from panic. These are choices made with foresight. The surveillance video does not reveal chaos. It reveals composure. There is another element of this case that warrants attention. The backpack is an Ozark Trail 25-liter model, a common item sold at Walmart, and authorities are collaborating with the retailer to track its sales. They are trying to determine sales volume in the preceding 30 to 60 days. They want to know if any purchases can be linked through financial records, whether paid for with cash, a card, or via the internet. While a backpack may seem insignificant, a recent purchase generates a transactional history, and such histories lead back to individuals. The same principle applies to the holster. Sheriff Nanos noted its distinctiveness. Detectives are circulating photographs to firearm retailers, inquiring if the model is familiar. A recent acquisition of that specific holster could similarly create a traceable record of the transaction. Let us now attempt to enter the mindset of the person who orchestrated this. They likely believed gloves would defeat fingerprint analysis, and a mask would thwart facial identification. The backpack conceals equipment. The holster secures a weapon. But have they considered the possibility of DNA evidence? While gloves may prevent the deposition of fingerprints, they can trap the wearer's own genetic material within them from sweat and shed skin cells. The discovery of a glove 2 miles from the scene implies it was disposed of at some point. One must ask why. Perhaps it was damaged. Perhaps its purpose was served. It could have been ejected from a moving vehicle. In a two-person scenario, one individual could operate the car while the other shed their gloves. Minor actions, seemingly insignificant errors, these are the details that ultimately break major investigations. Consider for a moment the investigators now layering different streams of information: cell tower data, DNA results, retail receipts, and traffic camera footage. They also have access to license plate recognition systems. A confession is not the objective. The objective is to establish links, and these links form a net. A net of this kind is exceedingly difficult to break free from once entangled. Yet, there remains an aspect we have not yet fully explored: the human dimension. Nancy Guthrie is more than a case file number. She is a mother, a grandmother, a person who called the same house her home for 40 years. Her daughter, Savannah Guthrie, has released video pleas, appealing for her mother to be brought home. Her words are aimed directly at those responsible. She states that it is never too late to make the right choice. That is not a message intended for the general public. No, those words are for a person who may be observing these events unfold, a person who may still be in a position to act. If two individuals were involved in this act, it is plausible that one of them has a different perspective now than they did on that night. Remorse and fear can escalate, particularly as the weeks accumulate. 23 days pass, and then more follow. The passage of time alters a person's state of mind. Initially, the rush of adrenaline is overpowering, but afterward, the silence becomes oppressive. Let us now examine the greater strategic risk for the perpetrators. Should the investigation transition to a more focused, long-term task force, public attention may wane. The news cameras and headlines might diminish, but DNA evidence does not degrade. Cellular data is permanent, digital records are indelible, and suspects who perceive safety in the absence of media scrutiny may lower their guard. They might begin to travel again. They could use their electronic devices with less caution. They might even start to speak about what happened. It is often when a suspect believes the focus has shifted elsewhere that they make a critical error. Now, consider a simple question. Imagine for a moment you are innocent, yet your name becomes linked to a missing woman in the court of public opinion online. What is your next move? Do you make a public statement? Do you issue a forceful denial? Do you offer public sympathy for the family, or do you retreat into silence? No single path is correct, but every action is a data point. Investigators are students of human behavior. They are not looking for emotion. They are looking for patterns and consistency. Let us now circle back to a specific phrase from the electronic ransom notes. The main individual. That choice of words implies a hierarchy. If a main individual exists, then so do subordinate ones. And where subordinates exist, they may feel a diminished sense of protection. They may begin to perceive their own vulnerability. This exposure is a catalyst for fear. Fear erodes rational thought and makes people unpredictable. Now consider the 19-year friendship. 19 years is a significant span of time, but even the most enduring alliances can crack under extreme pressure. Money is a test of loyalty. Fear is a test of loyalty. And DNA is the ultimate test. Because DNA is impartial, it does not forget the past. It is indifferent to human stories. The profile is either a match or it is not. And when it matches, it opens doors. Not metaphorical doors, but real ones, attended by individuals with badges. They arrive with warrants and begin asking questions that are very difficult to answer with any degree of calm. So the critical question becomes this. If the DNA results return with a link to someone inside that trusted circle, what is the next move and who acts first before that information becomes official? Because the moment that first move is made, the entire dynamic of the case is altered. The first person to decide to talk seizes something incredibly powerful. They gain control of the narrative. In most investigations, the first party to cooperate is the one who receives the most lenient treatment. That is the architecture of the justice system. Prosecutors incentivize information. They extend consideration for truthfulness. They grant concessions to the one who breaks the code of silence. So envision two people who possess knowledge of what transpired. Both are aware of this unwritten rule. Both understand that if the other one speaks first, the ground shifts beneath them. That is a quiet, but incredibly potent, form of psychological tension. Now, let us examine an element that has not received sufficient attention. Time. From 9:30 in the evening when Nancy was dropped off, until sometime between 1:30 and 2 in the morning, this is when the suspect is captured on video. This creates a 4-hour window. A 4-hour gap is a substantial period of time. It is long enough for an individual to return to their own home. It is long enough for phone conversations, long enough to create a plan, long enough to coordinate actions. If this were a spontaneous crime, that 4-hour gap is difficult to explain. But if the crime was premeditated, that gap transforms into a window of preparation, a window of time in which someone could leave their residence, meet with a second party, switch vehicles, change their attire, and pull on a pair of gloves. They could conceal their face with a mask and then drive back, using the darkness as cover. However, one must now account for neighborhood cameras. Neighborhoods in Tucson are equipped with an array of surveillance systems, including ring cameras, driveway cameras, street cameras, and in certain areas, license plate readers. To successfully avoid being recorded would require a deliberate consideration of approach routes and a knowledge of which streets have less surveillance. It would mean knowing which exits are cloaked in more shadow, and where a vehicle might be parked to avoid a clear recording. This demands a deep, local knowledge of the area, the kind of knowledge that comes only from living there, from driving those roads day after day. Now, picture the route south from the Catalina foothills, heading toward the rural expanse of land. Rio Rico is located approximately 60 miles south of Tucson, near the border. It is a remote, wide-open desert landscape with few homes and long dirt roads. At 2:30 in the morning, that drive is silent, dark, and desolate. If an individual required absolute seclusion, that region offers it. To be clear, there is no confirmed physical evidence that Nancy was ever taken there. But when investigators theorize about where a person could be made to disappear without witnesses, they examine maps of places just like that. They look for remote zones with sparse populations and minimal camera coverage. And if any person connected to this case has ties to such a location, that information becomes a crucial piece of the larger puzzle. Now, let us step inside the investigation room. Picture agents seated at tables. The walls are covered with maps, photographs of Nancy, and still images from the surveillance footage. There are lists of cell phone towers. There are names of people with connections to the family. Timelines are printed and displayed in sequential order. January 23rd, January 31st, February 1st, February 9th, February 13th. Every date is significant. Every movement is scrutinized. They never examine one clue by itself. They layer the information, the DNA from the glove, the DNA from inside the house, the cell tower data, the purchase records from Walmart, the records of holster sales, gun store logs, footage from traffic cameras, banking records, and power of attorney documents. the histories of friendships, and any existing criminal backgrounds. They analyze everything because a case like this is not solved with a single piece of evidence. It is solved through connection. And this is where the accomplice theory becomes critically important. If two DNA profiles are found, the investigators are no longer searching for just one identity. They are now searching for two. And if one of those individuals is identified first, that person immediately becomes a point of leverage. You can confront that person with the evidence you possess. You can press them for information about the second DNA profile. You can question them about phone records. You can question them about January 23rd. And sometimes, when confronted with hard data, people decide to talk. Now let us consider another scenario. What if one of the DNA profiles belongs to someone who has never been on the investigative radar? An individual whose name has never surfaced in public discussion. Someone operating outside the initial circle of persons of interest. Should that prove true, the entire investigative framework is reconfigured, as a proper inquiry must remain adaptable. The architect and accomplice model is just one analytical tool. If the evidence refutes this model, it must be discarded without hesitation. That is the essence of an honest investigation. Yet, if the evidence corroborates it, if names start aligning with known relationships, then that model becomes the very foundation of the case. Now, let us reconsider Savannah's public appeal. She is speaking directly to the individual who abducted her mother. She states that it is not too late. That appeal is not merely emotional. It is a calculated, strategic maneuver. It is designed to introduce doubt into the mind of anyone complicit. It signals that a path toward mercy may still exist. And the prospect of mercy can be a powerful incentive when fear begins to mount. This is particularly true if you are not the mastermind. It is especially potent if you feel you were coerced into the situation. If an accomplice feels they are a subordinate figure, if that person feels vulnerable, or believes the primary planner might try to assign all blame, they may choose to come forward. We now circle back to the matter of height. This was the detail that initiated this entire expanded theory. 5'9" to 5'10", a person of average build with facial hair. This description was not a perfect fit for Tomaso, but it does not eliminate Dominic as a possibility. And if the genetic material from the glove belongs to an individual within that specific height range, then the height issue ceases to be a problem, not because theory was forced, but because it was resolved by evidence. If, however, the DNA does not match anyone in that circle, the entire theory is substantially weakened. That is a critical point, because in any authentic investigation, both strengths and weaknesses must be given equal weight. Let us now turn to the complexities of human nature. When two people harbor a secret of this gravity, they are forced to communicate with extreme caution. Perhaps they cease all texting. Maybe they avoid telephone calls. They might resort to meeting in person. But even face-to-face encounters introduce new risks. Neighbors might observe them. Traffic cameras could record them. Mobile phones connect to cellular towers even when not in use. Modern life creates a permanent record. Very few individuals can truly operate without leaving some kind of digital footprint. The person who engineered this event possessed the knowledge to use gloves, to wear a mask, and to manipulate the camera. This implies a degree of sophistication. Yet, sophistication is not the same as perfection, as flawless execution is exceedingly rare. Even the most careful professionals are prone to error. In this instance, there were a minimum of two such errors: the documented rehearsal footage and the abandoned glove. These may seem like small oversights, but it is often the smallest details that unravel the most extensive plans. Imagine the investigators, waiting for the genealogical lab to finalize its analysis. Each day that goes by brings them one step closer to a name. Once that name is known, the entire investigation will accelerate. It will begin with interrogations. There will be search warrants, the seizure of electronic devices, and exhaustive digital forensic examinations. Financial records will be scrutinized, and if two individuals are involved, detectives can compare their stories. They can test one narrative against the other. Absolute consistency becomes the crucial element. If their stated timelines have discrepancies, the first cracks will appear in their facade. If cell phone data contradicts their statements, those cracks will widen. And widening cracks ultimately shatter walls of deception. This is where the narrative becomes even more taut, because we are in a moment where nothing is officially confirmed. Nevertheless, a number of different investigative avenues are now converging. The DNA path, the cell tower data path, the path of purchase histories, and the behavioral analysis path. When multiple paths all lead to the same people, that is the point when a case transitions from questions to criminal charges. But we have not arrived at that point. We find ourselves in the waiting period. This is the most precarious phase for anyone concealing a crime, because waiting allows time for contemplation. Contemplation can breed doubt, and doubt can precipitate mistakes. Now, Entertain one final scenario. What if the DNA recovered from inside the house belongs to someone in Nancy's immediate circle? Someone who had legitimate reason to be there, while the DNA on the glove is traced to an entirely different person. That possibility would complicate the entire investigation, as it would imply inside access coupled with outside execution. This again reinforces the theory of coordination, but it also raises new questions, which is why investigators are so methodical. They do not permit themselves to be rushed. They confirm everything. They cross-check every piece of information. They build their case deliberately, because when they finally take action, they must be absolutely certain. Now we must return to the 19-year friendship. 19 years of a shared past, filled with music rehearsals, recording sessions, late nights, private jokes, and common struggles. For two people who have been bonded for that long, fracturing that bond under intense pressure would not be a simple matter. But it is not beyond the realm of possibility. That possibility becomes more real when the fear of prison materializes, and when the notion of being the secondary party becomes a terrifying prospect. This is because secondary participants often face more severe consequences if they choose to remain silent. However, they can be offered reduced sentences if they choose to cooperate. Anyone who grasps this dynamic might begin to carefully weigh their options. A choice must be made between loyalty and self-preservation. That decision point is where this story may be headed. The moment one person chooses to prioritize their own welfare, everything changes. Because once one individual decides to protect themselves, the silence is broken. When silence is finally broken, the truth has a way of moving with incredible speed. Envision a stark interview room, furnished with nothing more than a table, 2 chairs, and a single recording device. An investigator carefully arranges a collection of papers on the table, a dossier of evidence including cell tower data, DNA reports, transaction logs, and detailed maps. The person sitting opposite the detective sees a chronicle of their own movements laid out in black and white, complete with dates, times, and precise locations. The investigator's voice remains level, without a hint of menace or aggression. They offer a simple invitation: help us understand what happened. In that quiet moment, the very concept of loyalty shifts, because loyalty might demand shouldering the entire weight alone, while cooperation presents an opportunity to share the burden. Let us pull back and review what is definitively known. Nancy Guthrie was specifically targeted. 2 distinct DNA profiles were recovered. A possible dry run of the events may have taken place 8 days earlier. A man matching the height profile released by federal authorities approached her front door with a composed demeanor. A glove was later discovered 2 miles from the location. Digital communications resembling a ransom note repeatedly employed the phrase, main individual. A long-standing friendship connects 2 men directly to the family of the victim. These are the established facts of the case, not conjecture or opinion. They are facts. The critical unknown is the identity of the individual whose DNA was found on that glove, whose genetic material was discovered inside the house, which cell phones were active near the scene on both January 23rd and February 1st. Who was the purchaser of the backpack? Who acquired the holster? Those answers are forthcoming. When they surface, they will either solidify the investigative framework we've examined or dismantle it entirely. If the forensic evidence points away from the initial circle of persons of interest, the entire theory of the crime will pivot. If it points towards someone within that circle, the questions will become intensely focused. But it is vital to remember something. The objective is not to be correct about a particular theory. The objective is to find Nancy, to comprehend what occurred, and to deliver some measure of truth to a family that awakens each day to an agonizing unknown. And sometimes the truth does not arrive with the drama of a televised arrest, but emerges quietly from the pages of official paperwork. It is found in laboratory results, in digital records, and in a quiet knock on a door just before the sun rises. The reward is currently $200,000. That figure now occupies a significant space in the thoughts of anyone who possesses undisclosed knowledge. Money has a way of changing a person's calculations. Fear also changes calculations. The passage of time itself can change calculations. And if 2 people are bound by a secret, time becomes their greatest enemy. This is because secrets only grow heavier with time, and secrets that become too heavy will inevitably lead to a breaking point. So this is our current position. The discrepancy in the suspect's height, which once seemed to invalidate a theory, now appears to be the starting point for a much larger one. The 2 separate DNA profiles indicate that this was unlikely the work of a single individual. The potential rehearsal footage suggests that this act was premeditated. The language of the ransom demands hints at multiple layers of involvement. The geography reveals a startling proximity. The friendship reveals a shattered trust. The known skill sets demonstrate a clear capability. But in the end, the evidence alone will render a verdict, not emotion, not online discourse, and not speculation. The DNA will have its say, the cell towers will tell their story, the purchase records will offer their account, and when they do, the narrative will become undeniable. Until that time comes, Nancy Guthrie remains a missing person. She is not simply a headline. She is not an abstract theory. She is a human being who is owed answers. Somewhere, there is at least one person who knows what took place on the night of January 31st. It is possible that two people know, or perhaps even more. But the truth cannot remain concealed indefinitely. It waits, and it gathers strength. And when the one correct piece finally clicks into place, everything will shift. When that moment arrives, there will be no more need for guessing. We will be confronting the facts. And those facts will either substantiate the model of an architect and an operative, or illuminate a path that we had not previously seen. But in one way or another, the waiting will be over. And when it is, the silence that has defined this case for so long will finally break. The story of Nancy Guthrie is not over. It is only paused. And the very next update, which will come when the DNA results are made public, could potentially change everything. Some of the most chilling crimes in America aren't committed by strangers lurking in shadows. They are committed by people who sat at the dinner table, who knew the family dog's name, who heard stories about a grandmother named Nancy. The disappearance of 4-year-old Nancy Guthrie from her Tucson home teaches us something devastating and urgent. Proximity can be weaponized. The people closest to us know our schedules, our vulnerabilities, our front gates, and our blind spots. But here is the redemptive truth. Buried inside this darkness, silence always has a cost. Secrets are heavy. They fracture even one. 9-year friendships. DNA doesn't lie. Cell towers don't forget. And loyalty purchased with fear is no loyalty at all. For every young person reading this, notice the patterns around you. Trust your instincts. Advocate for the elderly in your community. They are not invisible. And if you ever find yourself holding a secret that involves someone's safety, remember this. $200,000 is the price on justice. Your conscience is worth far more. The truth, like a forensic clock, is always ticking. Be the person who speaks.